Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Small Church Leadership. Really glad you can join us today. We've got a great conversation that we're going to dive into, talking about something that's really new to most of us. And if you haven't identified it yet, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And if you are experiencing it, but wondering what it is, we're going to talk about it today. Today, my friend Troy is going to join the conversation. And so let's give a big welcome to Troy. Yeah. All right. Troy's joining the call. Hey, Troy, how you doing, buddy?
Good, my man. How are you?
Good, good. Hey, so today, Troy, I want to take a few minutes to talk with the folks about this new thing called quitting quietly. And it's kind of a new term that's been coined probably in the last 6 to 8 months, primarily experienced with employees. So dealing with staff, not just in church life. This is a coined term that employers are experiencing everywhere. But I don't think it's going to be something that's an exception to the church. I think the church is going to face it too. And today, I think people are probably thinking, well, it's a small church, so I don't have staff. So you know what? This one's going to be free for me. But I think it actually is going to have a bigger impact than we think. And so the first question I want to talk about, Troy, is what is this quitting quietly, and what has caused it? I don't know about you, Troy, but have you ever been in a job where you're like, you know what, I'm doing my job, but I'm just doing my job. So like, you know what, my job starts at 9, and at 4:58, I start winding down. Although I work to 5, at 4:58, I'm pretty much shutting down. And then in a month from now, I'm almost shutting down at 4:45, and then it's 4:30. And you know what, by 3:30, I'm like wrapping the day up, and I'm still supposed to work till 5. You know what I'm saying? You know those kind of jobs?
No, I've never experienced that because
Uh,
I've worked for the Lord. So
oh, you work for Jesus.
yeah.
Okay, well, that's great. That's great. Well, for the rest of us who work for the Lord, I've been there, and so yeah,
No,
it's
man, it's
crazy,
it's
right?
it's a real thing. It's
Hmm.
it's a real thing, man. I've talked to people through the pandemic that feel like in some ways, my work it wasn't here for me when I needed them.
Right?
And I'm not doing the extras.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
not coming in early. I'm not staying late. I'm
Hmm.
they're going to get what they pay for.
That's right. If you want me to stay extra, I'm not throwing it in. You're gonna pay for it.
Yeah.
And so if there is no overtime in this job, don't expect overtime in this job.
Right.
And I think that's the case. So I think the first question we have to ask, what is quitting quietly? And then the second question is what caused it. And you've already kind of answered the what caused it question by saying, hey, the pandemic came. And I think the cause of the quitting quietly experience is that the pandemic came. And so once upon a time, if I was going to quit my job, Troy, and say I worked for you, I'd come to you and I'd say, hey, Troy, listen, I just want to let you know I'm going to be quitting, or I'm going to be resigning in a couple of weeks. I've enjoyed working here. Hey, thanks so much. But I've taken a new job. We're relocating. You know what? I don't like your hat. Whatever the case might be, I'm quitting.
Mhm.
And so then I would resign, or I would quit, depending on the environment where I was working. The language would be different, but and so that would be it. And you would know there's a hard end to my work period, and then there's a finality to it. There's a finish line. But quitting quietly isn't the same. In fact, in the quitting quietly, it's I'm not coming to you to quit. I'm just going to do my job less. I'm going to do only what's expected. I'm going to meet the requirements, but I'm just going to meet them. And if there is extra to do, I hope you have a plan to get it done, because don't expect me to do it just out of the goodness of my little heart. The idea that, hey, you know what, this is the job description, so I will meet the expectations, but there is no more.
Yeah.
And so people are slowly and quietly quitting. They're not outright quitting. They're just kind of dialing back. And at one time we would have said that's what lazy people do, Troy.
Right.
That's what we would have said. We would have said, well, that's how lazy people work. But hard workers, they're different. But such is not the case. And so employers, I should say, are experiencing this, and employees are doing it more often. And so back to the what caused it question, and you identified it, it's the pandemic. We came out of a pandemic, or we're coming out of a pandemic, depending on where you are and how your experience is. And you know what? I enjoyed less work hours during the pandemic. I was working from home, Troy, and you know what? When I'm at home, I had longer breaks,
Right.
and you know what? Sometimes I had my laptop open, but I might have been checking out YouTube instead of actually working on that little assignment that I was supposed to be working on.
Right.
And so, but now I'm back in the office, and now I'm back in the work environment, and now I got people around, and the pressure's a little higher. And so I'm just kind of slowing down a little, just kind of
Yeah.
taking it easy, Troy. Taking it easy.
Yeah. No, for sure. And like I know a lot of people are more spiritual than me, but last night I was watching a show on Netflix called Superstore, and it's basically about a department store. And actually, the episodes I watched were about the pandemic, and they were all pandemic, but they couldn't. Their work wouldn't provide PPE for them, wouldn't provide protection, and this raised all these issues of why are we going the extra mile if our work won't go to the extra mile for
Right.
us, you know?
Right.
And I think there's some residual feelings left over for people that had to work extra and long hours
Right.
during the pandemic to keep the work open, like I have a friend that owns a coffee shop, and obviously it was very problematic during the pandemic, but they started to do curbside pickup for coffee shops. So not only did their
Right.
baristas have to make the drinks, they actually had to put 40,000 steps in a day to deliver the coffee, right? Like people
Right.
had to go so far beyond the call of duty. I think they just got to a point where they're like, I can't and I won't do this.
That's right.
So I don't want to quit. I'm just going to give the bare minimum.
I'm gonna do the basic bare line what I need to get done to keep my job.
Right.
And I think that's what it is. That's what we're seeing everywhere in the work world. So this is all great, and this probably applies to churches that have paid staff. I mean, if you have a paid staff person, then this may be the case. If we've had paid staff or we know what it's like, we all have seasons where we're like, it doesn't feel like they're towing the line, or it doesn't feel like they're stepping up, or we all live in those seasons. And the truth is, as much as that's true for the employee, it's probably true for the employer too. There are seasons where we're just a little more, we're dogging it a little, and that's probably pretty normal. But I think the question we want to answer more, even so today, Troy, is the question of, so that's true. That's true for the employer-employee relationship, but I don't have employees. I mean, I'm a small church leader. I got some volunteers. And so, does this even impact me? Like, how does this impact me? And I think that's now the bigger question for most of our viewers, for most of the people who are joining these conversations. It's around, hey, I got volunteers, and I'll just start by saying, Troy, I think we all experienced coming out of the pandemic. We had less money and we had less volunteers. And so I think we all know what it's like to have less volunteers. Now the question becomes, have my volunteers just been less because we were in the pandemic, or have I had some quiet quitters along the way who are saying, you know what? I don't feel like volunteering as much at my church. You know what? I really enjoyed my family time in the evenings. You know what? It was nice when I was home 6 nights of the week. You
Yep.
know what? When there was no soccer, no hockey, no baseball, and no church, it was kind of nice. And I used to love my small group, but when I discovered I could do my small group on Zoom and I could stay home in the comfort of my own home, then that changed everything for me. And now I've learned that I don't think I want to go back to going out. Soccer's not as interesting to me. My kids aren't as interested in that, and so I can just stay home. So you know what? I'm not going to volunteer to host a group.
Yep.
And Troy, you know what? The Young People's Program, I'll send them a card from my house.
Right.
You know what I'm
Yep.
saying?
Guy, I'll tell you what I remember one of your first Zooms that you did. You talked about what are some things that you want to start doing, or what are some things you're not going to start doing again after the pandemic.
Right.
And I remember one of the things that came up either in a conversation with them or just me and you, that the hardest thing I thought was going to happen was to redeem time back.
Right.
And I think that's proven to be true. exactly what you're saying. People are used to being home. They're used to, some people have started having suppers together again. What I mean? And redeeming people's time back
Yeah.
has been like get them back to volunteering or get them back to an event or whatever has proven to be difficult,
You bet it has.
to say the least.
You bet.
So that's, and I think that's, even though it doesn't maybe quite fit into the category, it's that quiet quitting.
Yeah.
You know what? Like, I want to do this. I want to be a disciple, but I can't sacrifice three time slots a week.
Right. Or I want to serve in my church. I want
Yeah.
to be a volunteer still, Troy, but I prefer to volunteer Sunday mornings when I'm coming to church already.
Yeah.
Please don't require of me another night.
Mm-hmm.
Like I and I think we're seeing a little bit of that too. And so I think this impacts small churches. When you have a very small, a lot of small churches, I should say, have a very small volunteer base.
Yeah.
So when you only have 10 volunteers and now 4 of them or 3 of them even say, hey, I'm volunteering less, that really hurts.
Yeah.
A pastor like that really has an impact. On how they live and how they operate.
Yep.
And how they can depend on people and their workload. And, it's not just paid staff, it's also our volunteers, because most of our smaller churches, most of us that pastor in small churches, we heavily rely on these core volunteers who really make it happen.
Yeah, because even if you have a paid staff, even if they just work 40 hours a week, there's a responsibility for them to work 40 hours a week. I mean, if you have a volunteer, you don't have that same leverage or that same, right?
No, that's right. That's right. And I think it reiterates the point, and maybe another conversation, that having a volunteer pipeline is really important in our churches.
Yeah.
Most of us are just thrilled when every spot is filled. But the truth is, we need to have a replacement in place for every spot that's filled.
Yeah.
And so having a pipeline for volunteers is really important. And maybe at some point we'll talk about a volunteer pipeline in a greater capacity.
And I think one thing that goes, sorry to interrupt, but one thing I think that's important is, let's say you have volunteers pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And let's say John or Marissa has been volunteering in the nursery for 20 years. Then you go 40 weeks without having a nursery, right? Because we haven't given that volunteer, John or Marissa, an out earlier, then they now have one.
That's right.
Right. So they're like, well, this is my time. I'm going to take a break, and it's acceptable, because then you're like, yeah, it's been 20 years.
Right.
Like, we understand, but it gave them the.
My name is Chris Abbott, but
it gave them the opportunity,
right,
to jump.
That's right.
To jump to it.
That's right. And I think too, people are quitting quietly, and I'm not throwing volunteers under the bus, in the sense that we've come through 2 years that were very different.
Yeah.
And emotionally draining and physically draining in some respects, and mentally exhausting. So people are just tired too, which plays in.
Sure.
So we have all these things that we now know are a factor. We know that these are challenges. We understand that it's probably happening. If you would post in the comments, I'd love to hear, like, are you experiencing this? Where are you seeing this as a challenge? Have you lost some volunteers? Where have you lost volunteers? Maybe even who are some of your best volunteers? Not their names, but what are the roles that they carry? Because I think we also need to celebrate people, and that's the question we ask next: is how can I measure my loss?
Mm-hmm.
And then so how can I measure? How do I measure the spots where I've lost? How can I measure that? How do I catch it before? How do I catch it before it's too late? And what can I do to evaluate that? Like, where do I see it? Sometimes we lose volunteers and we don't know we're losing them until they're gone.
Yeah, totally.
But what's my overall volunteer health?
Yeah.
Have I checked in with my volunteers? Do I have a sense of what they're passionate about? Some volunteers' passions changed from pre-COVID to post-COVID.
Big time.
You know what? I was a small group leader, but now I have a greater interest in learning some tech because
Yeah.
over COVID, I discovered some tech and I kind of like it. So
Yeah.
maybe I need to move now from my small group position. Maybe I need to be involved in the tech side of things. Maybe I need to be working in the control room for our online broadcast, or maybe I need to be working in the production team where we're producing the services on Sunday mornings for the room. So I need to measure where my volunteers are at. I need to be able to measure how are they enjoying their role. Again, Troy, you've never had this experience because you work for Jesus better than I do. But there are some days when I think, you know what, I'd rather be the sound guy than the pastor. So if somebody would come along to me and say, hey, pastor, would you like a few weeks off and you can run sound for us? I'd be like, I'd like to be at the sound desk. If you can put me at the sound desk, I'll take a few weeks off of pastoring. I just like to sit in the sound desk, which is actually true for me. I love running audio. That's a passion of mine. I love audio. I love all that sort of stuff. So it's actually true of me. But there may be our volunteers who say, hey, I want to switch it up. So we may need to measure. We may need to ask some questions. We might need to throw out a couple surveys. We may need to gather our volunteers all together and have some conversations around, hey guys, have you ever thought about switching up your roles? Maybe you have those kind of open conversations where people feel comfortable to say, I would love to try that, or I'd love to learn that. One of our people in our currently who serve in our hospitality team in our cafe has recently shown an interest in being on our camera team, our camera ops team. And she just recently mentioned, she goes, I'd love to learn camera ops. And we're like, you would? Yeah. And we're like, okay. Like, I never thought the person pouring coffee would have an interest in running the camera ops team. I'm like, okay, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
But what a wonderful thing we can engage, because you know what? It's easier sometimes to get somebody to make coffee and serve coffee than it is to run the camera off.
Yeah. One thing we did to how to measure it is every year pre-pandemic, we would do a volunteer appreciation banquet.
Yeah.
So we always knew how many volunteers we had.
Exactly.
And how we qualified this was if you were on a schedule once a month, then you would qualify to be.
That's right.
Right. And so we knew that we had about 75 volunteers.
Right.
From year to year. During the pandemic, we obviously couldn't have a banquet. So the first year we didn't have one. The second year of the pandemic, can't believe we're talking about this in years, but the second year of the pandemic, we just used our previous list and we sent everybody out a charcuterie board as a thank you that they could do at home. Well, after the pandemic was over, we were able to do it again, and we did it, and we actually only ended up with 50 volunteers. So we had lost 25 volunteers, and that's how we measured it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, we're down 25 volunteers. We're not a big church. We have about 150 people. So we had 50% volunteering, and now we don't.
It hurts.
It hurt.
Yeah, it
and
does.
So then we had people that would serve coffee, run a camera, you know what I mean? Like go here, go there, work the door, and you can't do that to people. So then we're like, okay, we have to get back to 80 people.
Right.
And so then you have to do what you're talking about. You've got to ask people, you got to figure out where their passions and giftings are. Give more people an opportunity to get out of where they don't want to serve and get into where they do want to serve.
That's right.
Because the best way to get someone to volunteer isn't to make an announcement on Sunday morning.
No,
it's to have a passionate volunteer ask them to volunteer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, somebody's passionate will attract passion.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads us to our last question for today is what can I do about it? So what can I do to stop, minimize, or reduce the quiet quitting experience that people are seeing everywhere? And I think that's really what you're touching on here and the first thing by your example is we got to celebrate our volunteers.
Yeah.
If there's ever been a time where as leaders, we have to celebrate volunteers, it's right now. You must celebrate your volunteers. I mean, honestly, good old fashioned writing each volunteer a card, you don't even have to put a gift card in it right now. All you got to do is write them a handwritten card. Don't send them an email. Don't type a letter. Write a handwritten card. And if your budget will allow for it, throw a gift card in. But honestly, the handwritten card in the mail will make the world of a difference to a volunteer right now. Celebrating them on a Sunday morning is important. So we make it part of our service. We celebrate volunteers every Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Every Sunday we celebrate them. Hey, give it up for our events team who put this event on recently. Hey, let's give a shout out to our hospitality team. Did y'all enjoy a coffee this morning? Who got a coffee? You know, we just celebrating. Hey, we value these people. And you know what? Did you notice that the foyer tables, I forget what we call those things, but anyway, the foyer tables, did you notice that they had a layout on them and you could grab a snack on your way in this morning? Hey, let's thank our hospitality team for that. Let's take a minute to celebrate our worship team who put it together. You know what? There are people in the control room who you don't even see, and they're making it happen for our online stream right now. And you know, so we take that opportunity and we try to do it on rotation because you got to celebrate them. I think if there's ever been a time when we must celebrate volunteers, it's right now.
And it's free.
And it's free.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost me a thing to give somebody a shout out on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And I want to go a little further to say it's one thing to have somebody on the team give a shout out to the volunteers on the platform. It's another thing when the pastor gives a shout out to the volunteers on a Sunday morning. So it's not just when, it's who. And so take a moment. Sometimes I'll do it in the message. I'll be preaching a message on a topic, and I'll just connect it to a volunteer team in our church. You know what? Somebody was serving tables. Aren't you glad for people who serve? Man, let's just take a minute and give it up for the people who serve in this team in our church, and everybody will clap. And it's just a moment to go, hey, you're living out not only your opportunity to serve, but you're doing something that even the Bible talks about. And so let's celebrate that. And just stuff like that. We recently our building and maintenance team, a small thing. One of the stalls in the women's washroom, the door had come loose and it wasn't closing or latching properly or something. And they fixed it. I said, ladies, how many people are thankful for stall doors that work? And, a bunch of the ladies clapped, and, it was a fun moment. But once again, it was highlighting the building and maintenance team who you never see working are working all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think you got to celebrate people. I think the next thing you got to do with your volunteer team is you've got to give them a way to transition.
Yeah.
So talk about transition regularly enough that they know they can move. We're so afraid of losing people. Sometimes once we get them in a role, we don't want to tell them about any other role. And so we got to let them have an option. We've got to force them to have breaks. So we force people to not serve. You know what? This is your Sunday off. We are shorthanded this weekend, but you're not serving.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to celebrate them. We need to, and we need to make sure that they have an out, they have an option to change, and we need to make sure we're personally connecting with them as pastors, as leaders, to honor what they do. So I think the quitting quietly pandemic is sort of the new thing. We're seeing it. It's not just for paid staff. We can do something about it. And if you're looking for more ways to figure out how to serve your volunteers, let us know in the comments. We'll give you some creative ideas. Make sure you follow us on Facebook. Check out what we post there regularly. Thanks, Troy, for being with us today. So glad. And thanks for watching today. We're so glad to be able to serve you. If there's something we can do to help you out in your church setting, whether it's tech, coaching, whatever it is, please reach out to us. Let us know. You can send us an email, mail@smallchurchleadership.ca. Have a wonderful day.